Cool. We were just discussing camera issues, so I hope everybody can see us, but I would assume yes. For those of you who are already here, welcome to the salon of product management discussions. You'll find your usual webinar inventory around. There is a chat where you can now say hello, where you're logging in from, what's your opinion on cats or dogs, or whatever your favorite animal is. We'll start the discussion in a minute or two. You can already think about questions that can go into the questions box. I want to say the more specific, the more likely the answer is going to be relevant for you. And if you give a couple of details around it, like, I don't know, your company or, your role, that also is usually helpful for better answers, also for the rest of the audience. And yeah, we will introduce the speakers in a minute or so. Before that, I just keep on talking and soothe you into this webinar with my non-radio voice. I'm expecting a lively discussion, as I've also I kind of told our guests to make it lively, but I don't see any problems there. Yeah.
Oh, I see someone from Brighton. Hello, fellow Brightonian. Amazing.
Also Mississauga. I'm from Mississauga.
Oh, you're from Mississauga. Nice. I lived in Montreal for 10 years. I think I told you this, right?
Yeah. I lived there too for 11. We were there at the same time, I think.
Were we?
I was there, starting in 2006.
Oh, yeah, we were there at the same time.
Crazy, small world.
Well, I've not lived in any of those places, so I feel very left out.
Oh,
sorry.
Southeast London. There we go, Geraldine. Southeast London.
Okay, now that everybody has found their buddies, I think we can also continue with the general introduction. As I said, Andrea, Lisa, Jason, you get to just say a couple of sentences who you are, and then we can kick it off with the general intro question to our roundtable on how AI is transforming how product managers work.
Do I go first? Because you said my name first. All right. So my name is Andrea. I'm head of product marketing at Mindstone, and I am a dog person, despite the fact we were talking about cats. I'm just very allergic to cats, so I try to avoid them as much as possible. I know.
Cool. Welcome. Lisa, you're next.
Sure. I'm Lisa. I got into product after a career in biomechanics and then journalism. I'm currently the founder of Conscious Product Development. I'm a senior PM. I worked mostly in health tech and wearable tech on moonshot types of projects. And I worked at Google after a startup I was at got acquired before starting Conscious. So thank you for all being here. This is nuts.
And I'm Jason. So I am these days a consultant. So I work consult with B2B SaaS companies, do a bit of coaching, got my own mentoring startup. If anyone wants a mentor, come and talk to me afterwards. Also do a lot of content work. So I've got a nice little podcast that some of you may have heard of. So again, if you like podcasts, come and listen to that afterwards. Come and chat to me and I'll tell you all about it. And as Johannes said before this, I also do loads and loads of memes, which you may have seen on LinkedIn or Twitter. So sorry about that.
If you're offended, it was about you.
Exactly.
Cool. Very, very happy about this lineup with a topic that, can you believe it, after 6 months is still hotter than Clubhouse ever was. That's
not saying much, by the way.
Yeah, but there was this audio streaming app. Anybody remembers? Cool. Let's start with something simple around what is it even with AI and product management. Maybe you can give a short, doesn't have to be scientific definition, but a definition of what is the role of artificial intelligence in product management for you in general, and then we'll see where we get from there. I let you guys pick the order. Who wants to go first and pick up on the others? Your choice.
I will cede to the floor.
I will see it to Jason.
Oh, it's like the opposite of a filibuster. This obviously just means that no one knows. So I think if we're talking about the question being like, how is it affecting me day to day, or is it how it's affecting product management in general day to day, or both?
More the second for now than the first.
Yeah. So I mean, I've kind of tried to keep my finger on the pulse for like what's going on, when I've been monitoring the various social media feeds and such. And I think there's a few things that I've seen people saying at the moment. I've also got to call out, of course, that as a native English speaker, I'm speaking from a sort of certain area of privilege and thinking, well, I don't need something to write my emails for me. I've spoken to a bunch of PMs that are non-native English speakers that are using it to summarize or to kind of come up with better sounding stuff. Like they want to write an email to an important stakeholder. They're not confident in their English skills and they're using it to basically beef that up. And I think that's actually a really interesting use case and something that I'm very much behind. But also people have been using it as ways to kind of just easily look up frameworks. So they'll sit there and say, well, what are 5 prioritization frameworks? And it'll dutifully, list them out. Or they'll sit there and they'll say, well, give me some ideas for some ideation or some kickoff points for a workshop. And it just sort of, give it some basic parameters and it will come up with 5 or 6 different ideas in very flowery. You can maybe even get them to write it in the format of Homer Simpson or something like that, which is always a little bit of extra juice as well. So those are some of the ways that I've seen it. Sort of summarization, initial idea generation, and of course, if anyone's doing any kind of code at all, then like using it to effectively be their replacement for Stack Overflow. So like just saying, well, how do I make a web server that does this? And it just says. So those are some of the things that I've seen out there.
I think there's the way that I kind of think about it is as like an augmented version of your brain. But I want to say that with a grain of salt, because I think we have a long ways to go in terms of the bias that's embedded in. It's a whole other set of ethical questions that I care deeply about. But kind of snowballing off of what Jason just said, being able to use it in product management to help with research and idea generation, to validate ideas that we have before we actually launch products, and also for storytelling. So I've personally used it to help me put decks together to figure out like, okay, what should this order of events be when I'm trying to communicate this? And I think it's going to be and has been extremely powerful in helping us communicate more effectively in a variety of settings, like in different languages or, speaking with different people, figuring out how to update lines of code in a low fidelity way that doesn't involve a massive development team. With the new GPT-4 release, I'm really excited to see like how product managers use it once that becomes more like publicly available, because now it's just the paid version. But the particular example of taking a hand-drawn mock-up of a website and then actually implementing that in code, I think has a ton of power for product managers to be able to help validate ideas without having to rely on like months and months of development effort.
I myself am probably the skeptic in the group. I do like it. I do use it, but I do feel like there's a danger of over reliance in certain areas. So Lisa mentioned idea generation. I actually would caution against that just because I don't think that it's not cool, because I have tested it and I think it's cool, but much like anything, and I kind of want to take prioritization frameworks as, the baseline here. What happened is instead of people using it as a reference, they used it as the thing to do prioritization for them. And that's not what it was meant to do. So I feel like we're leaning towards the same thing, where people will just use it to write for them or to do stuff for them, or to generate ideas for them without using their own brain. And I think it was John Cutler brought up a really good point the other day, is how is ChatGPT and AI going to affect neuroplasticity if we're not doing those things by ourselves anymore? But on the other hand, I've used it myself, and I'm also conscious of, people that may have dyslexia that, may not be able or may not feel as confident writing their own emails, and how helpful it can be for them. So, hey, Said. So yes, it is human nature, but at the same time, how much is that going to affect us? And how much of that over reliance is going to really affect our ability to communicate, because writing at the end of the day is linked to our communication skills. And that to me is where I go, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah. Do we have enough safeguards in place?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and by the way, I was just reporting on what people are using it for. I'm not at all advocating mindless usage of it. I think the most apposite quote that I've seen recently, and again, I really wish that I could remember who said it so I could credit them, is that it's a co-pilot, not an autopilot. And I think I know it sounds kind of trite, but Said's point is also really true, that, and your point as well, Andrea, about the prioritization frameworks, this whole idea that if you're just gonna like, am I gonna sit there and say, right, I've got a 20 million pound or dollar or whatever investment to make in my next big bet for the company that's going to be the life or death of my startup or whatever, just ask ChatGPT what to do and then just do the first thing that it says? Absolutely not. Some people are going to try and do that. They may naively think that they're going to, but they're probably going to be disappointed with the results.
Do you think this is more dangerous in product management than, let's say, for example, I don't know, journalism or I don't know, politics or science?
Oh, I wouldn't want to use it for science. Like, you know, hey, ChatGPT, can you come up with a cancer cure? And God knows what that's going to come out with. I think it's dangerous because product management has such a high leverage effect, or it should, if you're getting to do your job properly within an organization. Like, you know, your decisions kind of echo through the entire company. So if you're sitting there making bad decisions based off of a possibly incorrect answer from ChatGPT, for example, then that's going to have a massive duplicate. Whereas a developer trying to get some code done quickly that doesn't work, they can just try it again, right? But trying it again in product management terms, if you're not, you know, working small or in iterations, could, you know, cost you quite a lot of money. So yeah, I do think that if we're talking about sort of SaaS product development and you know, startups, I do think that the impact for both for product managers and for the founders and the leaders of the company, if they think that they can just throw any old nonsense in and just do what it says on the way out like a genie, that's absolutely not going to work.
Yeah, and I see a comment about humans' dependencies on computers. That's why I'm so skeptical about it, is because I do fear people are just going to become overly dependent on it and just not think by themselves anymore.
I think any situation where humans are needing to make decisions or share information, which goes across so many different industries, those are the situations we need to be concerned about. And I would say in product, because we're making both decisions and we're sharing information on a very large scale. So you build a product that impacts potentially millions of people. That's where my biggest concerns are, when those decisions and those pieces of information that get shared get overly amplified without actually being able to filter down to be like, hey, wait, like, what is the root of, like, where is this data even coming from? What inherent biases are we basing this on that a lot of people will not question at all?
Yeah, and you were talking about ethics earlier, right? And that plays a huge part of it. So yeah, I as the skeptic in the group, and I feel like it's being shared for sure. Yeah, I just watch out for that. And you can almost tell as well when something is written by ChatGPT because it's often very repetitive and it uses certain types of words that I have almost already learned to identify what is ChatGPT and what isn't. But yeah, for me, it's how it's affecting our neuroplasticity, how it's affecting our ethics, how it's affecting the way we communicate, the way we write, the way we talk to others as well. And obviously, it is also going to affect how we develop our own empathy as product managers and as product marketers, Johannes. So, you know, part of what we all do in this room involves a high level of empathy. And if we're relying on something else to write those things for us, then how are we, you know, going to develop it?
That's the thing in AI, I don't think we'll ever be able to be replaced. Human empathy. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's more dangerous than, let's, for example, what people said about social media, or there was also the comment on the chat, it's like the web in 1995, you know, this dangerous machine that we should totally watch out for, that it doesn't do something to our brains. I wonder why AI is so much more dangerous. Not more dangerous, but in a way, like, why is it so tempting to use it? Is it because it feels so real and you're like, oh, this is a result, I can use this, you know, like you're less critical about what it kind of spits out?
People are looking at it, and I've worked in sort of AI products in the past doing natural language processing and been often disappointed with some of the results because, you know, back then a few years ago, maybe the tech wasn't, or definitely the tech wasn't as far ahead. And like, everyone's used to, you know, kind of rubbish sort of Siri implementations and, you know, just like it not feeling quite right. And the fact that it can that you can type something in and it just says, and, you know, it just looks like something that someone wrote. Like, obviously, the amount of work and effort and the clever science that's gone behind it which I understand to a very minuscule level, kind of vaguely how it works. So I'm sure that there's some mind-blowing stuff that's going on, but also in some ways probably kind of simple. Like they've taken some existing technology, transformers and such, and they've basically applied that to, as far as I can tell, just all of the information on the internet for up to 2 years ago or whatever like that. But I think it has this. If you remember that story from the Google guy a few weeks or months back, whenever it was, who thought that his AI was alive, and everyone else is like, well, of course it's not alive. But it seems so alive because it does feel like you can ask it to, effectively read you or write you a poem in the style of anyone, and you're like, well, how could a computer do that? It just feels so mind blowing. But we all really have to understand, take a step back. That yes, it's cool. Yes, there's going to be a bunch of applications off of it, but ultimately it doesn't really know what it's saying, and that's an important thing to bear in mind. Like, we're not actually talking to a new sentient being. We're just talking to something that's been trained on a rather large corpus of text and kind of knows what order that text normally comes out in and can then remix that in another way. So it's definitely cool, but I just think it feels more real and more like something from a sci-fi film than perhaps really is.
I think you just touched. Sorry.
No, you go.
I was going to say, I think you just touched on a really interesting point, which is it doesn't know what it's doing. What it knows is what you put into it. And I think that's what many people don't understand, because they're like, oh, I'm just going to have it write, my emails, but it needs context. It needs a lot of input to get to a point where perhaps what it says starts making sense. So today I actually asked it if it was familiar with Teresa Torres's opportunity solution tree. And I had it explain to me what it was in detail. And then I took what, it had told me, and then I said, okay, based on what you've told me, I had to change some of my words to match the way it was thinking. And I said, okay, well, here are the opportunity spaces, some of the opportunities that I have, and here are some of the questions for interviews that I've come up with. Based on what you know and the information that I've given you, how would you improve these questions? What would you change? But most importantly, why? What evidence do you have to make any changes to my work? And that's the important part, is that you have to ask it for evidence so that it always justifies itself, and that as a person, that what it's doing is based on something, and it's not just, the typical, our roadmap is a timeline of features.
Totally.
Because that's what I've gotten as a response before.
The thing that's crazy to me is how widespread it already is. So it's not just early adopters. I have one of my best friends is a teacher. She teaches in elementary school and she's using it for her work. My grandfather's 90 and he's using it and it's blown his mind. The fact that it's already embedded in our lives before we even really fully know how to use it or what the impacts are is crazy to me. In addition to the fact that I think a lot of people, because we grew up with tech and it's embedded in our lives already, like we've become really lazy, so we don't think critically. So a lot of people don't know. Not only do the responses feel very real in some cases, but so people take them at face value, but a lot of people don't know things like each version that's released has a knowledge cutoff date. So sometimes you'll input input questions, and then it'll say, I don't know that my knowledge cutoff date is September 2021 for the current version that's publicly available. But if you ask a general question, like what are the biggest problems in the world right now, which can be used to inform product development, it actually doesn't tell you what the knowledge cutoff date is. So you're actually missing a ton of important information. And the other part of this is bias, because especially with OpenAI, there's one governing body that's the gatekeeper for all of this. If you have one specific team that's making all of these decisions in a black box in terms of how to inform how it behaves, that's a really scary situation to be in that I don't think enough people are questioning. I actually wrote an article about this last week, and I'll put it in the chat, because I just think that that's bananas. There needs to be more people involved. Right now, we're basically using it as a tool that's replicating all of the biases that we already have in our humanity and society, and it's just going to be amplified even more if we don't do anything to change that.
Yeah, I think it's also fascinating that OpenAI started as you might expect from the name, an open initiative, which was very open and collaborative, and everyone could kind of see inside. And they've now explicitly not, they've closed up, and obviously they've been acquired by Microsoft or invested, whatever happened, and they're presumably being kind of told to do that. And they've got this weird kind of thing in their constitution, kind of a weird governing body that they've set up to basically say, oh yeah, well, if we ever believe that we're about to come up with like, general intelligence, then we'll open it up again. But like, they're the ones that get to say that as well. So I completely agree that, I mean, this is a problem not just with GPT 3.5 or 4 or OpenAI in general. It's a problem with AI in general. Is how do you, exactly to your point, is like, how do you know how it's making its decisions? How can you challenge its decisions? And can you is it in any way explicable where those decisions came from, or what the impact of those decisions are?
There was an interview last week with Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, on ABC, and he literally said word for word, "We ourselves are still figuring out how to use this." And to me, that's terrifying.
It is because, as you said, it's just become so widespread. But something that Johannes touched on earlier is, you said something like the effect of social media. And I think that's the scary part, is we have seen over the last however many years the effect of social media, and just how both beautiful and absolutely terrifying and terrible it has been. Not just how our own mind maps have changed. I remember being in a coffee shop was it a coffee shop? No, I was at an airport, and my friend didn't have any Wi-Fi, but he kept going like this with his hand. I'm like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I miss my phone." And he just kept doing this because his mind now works in swipes. So it's affected the way we think, the way we behave, how it impacts, just our everyday lives. And if social media was able to do that, and obviously it took quite a long time for social media to develop, I say 20 years, but ChatGPT and AI has just gone boom in 6 months. It's insane.
Like no literacy for it yet. What you said, Lisa, reminded me of, like, it sounds a lot like you need to treat it like a co-worker that you don't know yet. You're like, where do you get this knowledge from? Are you just pretending to know this? Or like,
question everything like any product manager would. Ask why.
Yeah, totally.
I don't
totally.
believe you. Prove me otherwise.
Like, sorry.
No, I just wanted to pick up on the point that you made earlier as well, Lisa, about empathy and like treating AI as kind of a human coworker. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit, especially on this topic, on like, how should we think about this, and how can we, kind of put the empathy component into working with AI, and how can we, make this work for us? Because the tool is obviously here. Now we need to be better at working with it. But if you had another point, I don't want to.
No, actually, I think it was Andrea that mentioned that originally, and I just added onto it. Yeah. So you can take this, Andrea.
I would say very clearly, AI does not have empathy. It's a machine. Number one rule, right? Don't expect it to be empathetic about anything. And we don't even know how it's really trained or where it's getting its information from. So it already has, inherent biases, like Lisa mentioned earlier. So what I would say is the empathy comes from you. So question it. And as we were just saying, question it like you would anything else. Ask why, ask for evidence. But at some point, it's not really going to be able to give you perhaps the answer you're looking for. I say, quote unquote, you have to put in your own input. You can give it as much context as you want, but really, what does it know about cultural references, really, and the way you, like, you're a product marketer, right? How would you write to someone that lives in the US versus someone that lives in the UK, and how you do cater messaging to different cultures versus someone that lives in Germany? And if you're writing, that same text in German, I don't think, at least now or ever, who knows, will it be able to really understand those nuances, because they're human nuances. And it doesn't have empathy. It just knows facts. It knows what it knows. And I think we're overestimating its ability to be human, is what I would say.
I'm going to give you a human example. Oh, no, Lisa, now you go. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say one really good way to sanity check this is if you ask it a very explicit question, like the other day I asked, what are the real and potential implications of your knowledge cutoff date? It gives you a very straightforward response. So it's very explicit about the gaps it has when you ask those types of questions. So if you're ever feeling like, this isn't, am I speaking to a robot or a human? You can always ask things like, what biases are you operating under? And it'll give you responses, which kind of bring things back to reality. Be like, okay, this is not a human with empathy. This is a tool that humans have created, and there are very explicit limitations here.
I guess the question is though, and if we think about empathy, like thinking of empathy and like how we empathize with our users, if we're thinking back to sort of product management rather than just AI in general, is like, well, what could we use it for? Like, would we feel comfortable hooking it up to a voice output and a recorder and just like making it do our customer discovery for us? Absolutely not. Like, would you trust that to go out there and like interview like 100 customers or something like that, and then come back and just write your product strategy? Absolutely. I mean, maybe someone would, but I certainly wouldn't. I think that a few people have touched on already the kind of idea that you have to add people to it to really get the best out of it. And this goes back to that kind of co-pilot versus autopilot thing again, which I firmly believe. Like, I've used ChatGPT to sort of spitball ideas and come up with bits of code and like write little bits of help pages and stuff. But I've read every single line that comes back to make sure that A, that I agree with it, and B, that it makes sense. Now, obviously, that would be a lot more difficult if I didn't know anything about the subject area. Like if I asked it to explain string theory to me or something like that, then that would be a bit outside my wheelhouse. But if it's something that's inside my wheelhouse, then I'm reading every single line of that and checking to make sure that it's true, that it represents my beliefs and it represents what I want to get out of it. So that sort of human plus AI combination, I think, could be a winner. But it really does have to be a partnership.
I am a little personal story. I wasn't the most empathetic person a couple of years ago. What I did do though is talk to a lot of people, and how I learned to be more empathetic is by very strictly applying a couple of rules to myself. And then over time I became more empathetic, just out of habit in a way. I'm still not as good as my wife is at it, but I am a lot better than 10 years ago for sure. So probably AI is going to learn about it in a way in the future, and then also gives us better, more human results, but it'll probably never replace the whole I'm a human, I need to think for myself aspect.
This goes into the whole question about what is consciousness, and that starts to get to be a much bigger question than we can probably answer on this webinar. But like, it's a valid point, right? Like, what is empathy? Is it actually something intrinsic to humans, or is it something that can be learned? Is it something like effectively, like if, for example, I know various neurodiverse people that have had to kind of they mask, they kind of have to invent response. There you go.
I have before. Exactly,
but like you have to invent responses that don't come naturally to you. Now, I'm obviously not going to put that in the same camp as an but is there a similar process behind, like, can something appear to be empathetic even though it's not? Because again, if you just train it on enough stuff.
I mean, sociopaths, but that's what they do, right? Sociopaths mimic empathy. They know how to mimic it, but they don't feel it themselves. Mm-hmm. So the question is, can AI do the same? Can it mimic empathy, but not feel it? And I think that is the difference between having empathy as a human and pretending to have empathy as a machine.
But
so you can mimic it. You can mimic it. You'll never know. You can mimic it, but empathy is really about feeling it and being able to process those feelings yourself as if you were the other person. Yeah. But AI is never going to be able to do that because it doesn't feel.
Very interesting. I think we've reached the philosophical edge of this discussion, as Jason mentioned. We will not debate when it starts being alive and actually empathetic. So I want to turn our discussion around a little bit. I'm going to publish a poll to everybody, just generally. Are you even using it? Now, we've heard a little bit about it, but have you implemented AI in your product management processes yet? And then I want to talk a little bit about these practical implications. It has been here and there in our discussion as well, as in like it can do a couple of things, but maybe we can discuss this as well. I'm going to give people a couple of minutes seconds to respond to this. In the meantime, maybe one of you, Jason, you've already mentioned a point. One of you can explain a little bit how you've been using it and what has actually been useful and what has been complete garbage and not useful at all.
Well, I can tell you what's been complete garbage is asking it what a product roadmap is and trying to write content. It doesn't know. And it just, I'm sure it's based on all like the really bad copy pasta out there of like, a roadmap is a timeline of features so that you can deliver things for your customers. I mean, we all know better than that at this point, right? But somebody that doesn't know is going to take that and then keep rewriting it and keep rewriting it and keep rewriting it. But I have used it to either summarize. So the summarization is quite good. We use it at Mindstone in our own app. So when you load in an article or a podcast, like if I put in one of Jason's podcasts, it might give me a summary and say, here is the summary of, here are the key takeaways. This is what this podcast is about. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty useful. But that doesn't replace, obviously, listening to the podcast itself. It might help you decide whether or not you're going to listen to the podcast and whether it's something that's of interest to you. Same with any article. And I've quite kind of enjoyed asking it to look at some of my questions, look at some of my content and go, okay, if this is the intended audience and this is what the platform is about, and just giving it a lot of context, then go, okay, how would you change this, or what recommendations might you have, but why? And that, I think, is how you really turn it into an assistant, is to give it as much context as possible, and then asking for evidence behind, why they would make a change.
Yeah. So I have used it really in 3 ways so far. One of which, for the mentoring startup, which I started with a couple of friends back in January, we needed to write quite a lot of effectively help content for you to kind of talk about mentoring, what it is. Now, I'm quite lazy. I didn't want to spend God knows how long typing that all out and trying to think of the best way. So I went to ChatGPT and I asked it to give me some content around some of the. So I fed it with the questions and it came back with a bunch of answers. But again, I read every single one. I rewrote a lot of it. It was just one of those things where it was easier for me to get a basic framework and then change it rather than starting everything from scratch with a blank page. So I make no apologies for either like going there to get the content, but also B, for actually just changing half of it anyway. It still felt like it was more efficient. Another thing that I've used it for is for, I've inherited an app in a programming language that I didn't know too well. I don't know how to do everything in that language, so it's like a glorified Stack Overflow for me, which is obviously hilarious since it's probably trained on Stack Overflow as well. So it's going to put Stack Overflow out of business by using its own data against it. But yeah, so I've used it as a kind of a glorified Stack Overflow. Those are things where it's worked pretty well. Where it's worked less well is, and kind of touching on Andrea's point a little bit, but it's like when you just sit there and kind of throw some questions about it, like giving it 2 or 3 inputs and saying, right, for example, take the value proposition or some of the content from some competitor's website or something. Just say, what do you think their strategy is, or something like that, or should be, or where do you think they're going to go next? And of course, it has no idea, and all it comes up with is a lot of, again, copy pasta or just sort of really generic stuff with the words changed. Now, I'm not expecting it to be able to do my job for me, obviously, but it was really interesting to see, because obviously that's just me running experiments on it. I'm sure there are other people out there that are actually thinking this is the way to go, like to sit there and say, right, well, I don't know what my next quarter should look like because I just can't work it out. So here's some of the stuff that we do, and here's some things that we were thinking of working on. Go forth, machine, and tell us what it is that we should do for the next quarter, and just kind of rank it all for us and spit out some PRDs. And like, it's not going to do any of that, or if it's going to take so much time to make it do that, and you still got to read all the stuff anyway. That I just think that kind of thing. Sure, great to get some basic ideas, but I would never trust my life to it quite yet.
Yeah, I agree. I've used it mostly for actually research. So pulling together tons of information from different places very efficiently. I always double check though when I'm digging into something to understand, okay, like, is this true? So some examples are competitive landscaping, looking at, okay, I want to develop a product in the climate tech space. Can you tell me about some of the biggest challenges that we're facing right now, for instance, in alternate energy? And why are these problems? Understanding kind of like lots of different pieces of information that I would typically go to Google and like probably spend a lot longer finding individual like sites and sources for while sorting through ads. Doing that is a lot more efficient with ChatGPT. But I always have to do that sanity check. I also use it a lot for my own marketing and like wording when I'm thinking about, oh, I want to write about this and I want to write it in this way. Can you give me some other ideas of like how I can say this? And I won't usually use things word for word, but it's just enough of an impetus. It's like throwing things at the wall and helping me brainstorm with myself, which I really like. And then third is problem framing. So understanding really efficiently like specific regulatory constraints while you're building a product, or things that you need to really understand in the early stages of product development that can help inform everything after. But again, like, take it with a grain of salt and always double check it. The thing that I would say like hell no is like I think Andrea touched upon this earlier, like anytime you have to like, you're trying to use it to make like a large decision or like prioritizing things, I feel like you can give it certain inputs, but usually there's inputs you're not even thinking about that you've already synthesized within yourself in so many different ways, like the people involved, the types of like historical decisions that have been made in the past that it cannot understand because it doesn't have that context. There are so many of those pieces of information that get lost. So I would be very, adverse to using AI to help you prioritize like large scale decisions or work that you're doing as a team.
Interesting. I also feel like when listening to you guys, how I feel about it, whenever I use it, I feel it like I'm talking to it when I don't have another conversation partner ready. And then I reflect to what it's saying back to me to understand, is this how I'm thinking about this? I don't think so. This sounds very wrong. And then I don't know, go to Google or like read a book or something. I want to give you guys a couple of data points maybe to talk a little bit more about the applications. So the results of our poll are in. 42% of people have not yet implemented it. However, 27% are still planning on doing it, and 31% have done it so far. When we look at data from our blog, we've written extensively about AI in the past couple of weeks. The blog post that gets most traffic still is the 70 most popular prompts that you can use for ChatGPT, or people are still somewhat in this
That is so dangerous. I understand why it ranks really well. But I was going to say earlier, those type of posts are actually really dangerous because it's leading people to think that that's just how they should use it. Like, write me a blog post about this. No, do not use it to write for you. What you can do, for example, which is I've used it for this before, and I thought it was really smart, is I was writing a blog post and I said, I really need this to rank really high. This is my keyword, and these are my headers and subheaders. Fix them so that they're SEO friendly, given that this is my keyword and these are my sub keywords. And that it did very well. So it optimized what I had already done, but it didn't write it for me. So I think those, 40 prompts to write your product strategy, as Jason said earlier, it should not be writing your product strategy for you.
Yeah. They're also labeled as inspiration, less than here's your recipe for success. However, people read the article we have on the is ChatGPT changing product management for the better that someone from this round here wrote. They're reading it longer. So I think it seems like they're thinking about the topic as well. And last data point is we recently implemented an AI assistant in airfocus, which is also kind of surfing on a trend, but it was also kind of fun because we've been using it every now and then anyways. And you know what people do most? They like look at the results and then don't implement them. They're like, interesting. Just so they use it, but then they don't actually insert maybe they do copy paste somewhere else and then, write it in the description or in the comments later. But what this tells me at the moment is that like people are still trying to find their way around, like, how can I use this? And maybe the three of you have good practical tips of like, for the rest of the year, how can I approach working with AI in order to actually get valuable practical results out of it? Taking into account that probably discarding the topic altogether is not going to be the solution, because most likely it's going to stay somewhere around. So you have to be concerned with it. But I'm interested in like, what am I actually supposed to do with this now?
I would say use it as an assistant, which I think we've said quite a bit here. Don't rely on it to do work for you, but use it to double check. I think one thing we haven't talked about is things like analysis and looking at trends for large amounts of data. So I think that is very interesting. For example, giving the AI a bunch of stuff so that it can predict possible trends for how things might go. But again, you do have to be careful because it is looking at past data. Not so as with anything, you do always need to be careful. But if you want to start using it, give it context of what you've done, ask it, how it would change something and why, and then use, your own thought process, your own self to decide what you might change. Not everything it tells you is smart.
There's a company actually right now, a climate AI, that's doing exactly that for predicting trends in climate and the environment, like 20 years out, which is, I think, super interesting, but similar concerns there. I would say make sure that you're getting really good at asking questions. In a way, it's an immediate piece of feedback for you to see how good your questions are and how well thought out your questions are. You can see when you get a response that's not what you expected, it's usually because you didn't ask a question or frame it properly. So in a way that helps you become a better product manager if you kind of use that as a feedback loop. And you can definitely like do a better job as on a continuous basis, no matter, you know, what versions get released or what new features are used, of making sure that you understand the gaps and limitations. I don't think that OpenAI is as upfront about this as it should be. They released, for instance, a scorecard with the release of ChatGPT 4 that they didn't talk about. I only found out about it from reading a New York Times article. And this scorecard, I can probably find a link to it quickly and put it in here, but they basically had a bunch of people in different kind of organizations test it for safety. And they would ask it questions like, you know, very explicit questions to like try to do harm and see how it fared. And they actually released it knowing that you didn't have fixes for everything. So be really clear on the limitations that you're going to working with the, you know, version that you're using and what you're actually expecting to get out of it.
I think also this is something that I recommend not just with you know ChatGPT. I mean, obviously, which is the kind of the expression of AI that we've been talking about today. But there's obviously lots of AI solutions out there, and there are going to be AI solutions that we use in our day-to-day jobs, the same as anyone from any vertical or any kind of function could do. But then there's also the AI that we could put into our solutions themselves, like to actually put into our products that we deliver to our customers as well. But my advice for both of those is with regards to AI is kind of the same. And this is based on kind of personal opinion, but also experience from trying to do that. And it's like, be careful or be aware of the stakes of like it being wrong, because all AI, all machine learning is going to be wrong a percentage of the time. Like that's just how this stuff all works. It's all statistical. And of course, humans and people are wrong sometimes as well, but in a very explainable way normally. Like you can look at a decision that someone made, and because we're humans and we can empathize with them, we can sit there and say, well, yeah, I can understand why Andrea did that or Lisa did that. That was just a thing that people can sometimes do or misread or misunderstand, or maybe they were just angry that day. You don't get to have that transparency with AI-based solutions, which means that error is very difficult to explain sometimes. And if that error is difficult to explain, it then goes down to this idea of, well, what are the stakes? Like, is this a $20 million decision? Is it a $1 decision? Is it a free decision? Like, what is the cost of this going wrong? And again, if I'm sitting there saying, well, I just need to kind of noodle some ideas, I'm kind of coming up with some ideas anyway, and I just need to kind of maybe get some extra inspiration, like you're still a filter. You've still got veto over those things. Whereas if you're sitting there saying, well, I need to make an incredibly expensive decision that's going to cost my company, it's existential for my company, and I'm going to trust this to the AI and not really do anything, then it doesn't stack up. So being really clear of the impact of it inevitably going wrong sometimes, like what happens when it goes wrong, and is it okay, and are you going to be okay with dealing with the fallout of that? Is the decision that you're going to make off the back of this worth the risk of it maybe being wrong? Because, for example, self-driving cars, if they go wrong, they smash into a lamppost or maybe kill someone. Something that recommends the next movie is, maybe a slight irritation for an hour and a half or something like that. They're not, obviously they're both very different applications of AI, but they're both, they both suffer from the same problem of inevitable failure that doesn't necessarily make any sense.
I would also add, think about the biases that we're already dealing with that so many people are unaware of, and think about that before using yet another tool that can amplify these. So things like most products that we use today actually were designed for men, because the data set was used, the anthropometric data was based off of military data of physical body proportion. So things like women are, I don't know if this is still true, but a couple of years ago, it was like women were 74% more likely to die in a car accident because every single crash test dummy was based off of the male anthropometric data. So things like this that I think most people walk through life totally unaware of, think about that on steroids when we use these types of tools, and be aware of those things before jumping in.
I would add, just also based on the question that just popped up, can AI be used to optimize a product page that contains different affiliate links and prioritize the order of the links based on the best performing ones? Sure, but you're going to waste so much time inputting that data that you might have well just done it for yourself. So at some point you have to decide, am I wasting more time trying to get an answer from it when I could just, use what I know and make that decision by myself? So is it one of those things where we're suffering from, decision paralysis, and we're just hoping that something else is going to make the decision for us because we don't want to? I foresee that, potentially being a risk there.
Yes, I like that. It's a little bit like, am I willing to learn this new Excel formula, or am I just going to like brute force this into the Excel sheet?
Yeah, basically.
Interesting. I mean, what you're saying is basically also about like be a good product manager, critical thinking, various sources, evidence, facts, customer conversations, think about the value, that basically AI becomes yet another tool in the arsenal. And I really like what you were saying, Lisa, about, do you really want to bring in another complication into the already very kind of complicated product work with all its biases? And that it connects neatly to a question that we have from JD, which is that a large part of product management work is actually about working with stakeholders, communicating. Do you see any way of AI helping with this?
I mean, maybe. So again, I think I'm conflicted. I have 2 points of this. One is I think absolutely not, because again, that requires communication skills and empathy, and you have to know how to write. You have to, like, all these things are connected to each other, right? You're not going to develop them if you're not actively working on them. But at the same time, I know a lot of marketing people, and I know a lot of product managers as well, that are dyslexic, and they have a really hard time writing things, and they just spend so much time trying to form, something that makes sense, and then they need help from, in my case, I'm the product marketer in the team, so they send it to me to review. I wonder if in that case, that's where ChatGPT does come in handy, where they have their own assistant, where they don't have to rely on me to have the time to review something for them. But it's like, there's a fine line there, right? Is, do they trust what the AI is telling them back? And that's where I worry about these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's an exoskeleton rather than a robot, right? It's something that you put on to help you achieve things that you couldn't achieve as easily before, but like, it doesn't do anything on its own. I think, yeah, you're right. Again, it goes back to, as you say, dyslexic people, or people, again, non-native speakers, or anyone like that just has trouble expressing themselves in a way that, maybe it's limiting because they find that they can't phrase things in the right way because, and they're struggling to get by. And I mean, obviously then you have to call out that only really works in a written form so far. Like, they're not going there with a Babel fish or anything like that they can just sort of sit there and have those communications in real life. So again, it's a useful crutch, but it does remain a crutch. I think that when it comes to just in general, I mean, we've all talked about, well, we mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned earlier about like, well, yeah, we certainly wouldn't, for example, want this to go out and just have our conversations for us unattended. So like, it absolutely isn't a replacement for any of that stuff, but like, can it be used to smooth off rough edges? Or, maybe even like an easy way to consider it is like, well, what if I have like a really, like, what I think is a really knockout point that I think I'm going to bring up in the meeting, or some great new thing, like just asking ChatGPT to come up with 3 rebuttals to that point, so you can start to anticipate, like if you're preparing for that big, exec team presentation or something like that, like, it's really easy to walk into those things and get derailed by, some objection that you didn't think of because you got so invested in your idea that you just think everyone's going to love it. Whereas, ChatGPT doesn't love anything. So it's just going to give you completely open and honest, random, somewhat feedback about the idea. But it at least gives you a chance to, test against someone that isn't going to judge you, or not judge you too harshly within the outside of the session, at least.
If you start with that good foundation, you can use it to gather ideas to help you figure out how to move forward. So like, there's actually a really good commercial I just saw for Grammarly, And this lady is like at her desk, and she gets a message from her boss, like, we need to increase sales by 10% or whatever it was. And something more dramatic than that. And basically she starts writing a message to her teammates, and it sounds really like abrasive, like super confrontational, like do this now kind of wording. And so Grammarly automatically, there's like a toggle that she pushes to like make it sound more diplomatic, so she can kind of rephrase it. And you see the different iterations of what she's thinking of rephrasing it as based on their AI responses. So situations like that, I can see it being extremely helpful as long as you do have a good foundation to begin with and can really flesh out like, yeah, I'm going to choose this one versus this one. If you don't, it makes things more complicated. I also think using it like DALL-E tools for telling stories visually to show versus tell, I think are extremely powerful, where you could put together, I need to get alignment on this thing. I need buy-in from the team. I want to tell a story in this way. I can't get someone from design to like help me create a mock-up like by tomorrow for this. So I'm going to use DALL-E to generate some images in this kind of format for me. And then it helps to kind of gather buy-in from the team in that way. And it can also help with situations where you're like maybe dealing with a conflict and you've got a couple of thoughts on like how you want to move through it. If you give it the right context and it can spit out potential options to like move forward. I think Jason, you said it's like, how do you smooth out the rough edges? Like those situations, I think it's like really great to gather more ideas and perspectives to like help you figure out how to proceed instead of just, reacting right away and you're off to the races and end up causing more problems. But again, yeah, like everything we're saying so far, like take it with a grain of salt. You have to start with the right foundation. And if you don't have empathy to begin with, I think it's really challenging to use it to generate that with people.
Yeah, I agree. Lots of great points today. Johannes, you're muted.
Yeah, my daughter was disappointed that I'm not with her, but I'm with you. So I needed to mute myself. And what I was saying is like, I saw this product on Product Hunt, I don't know, like a couple of weeks back, that was like, how can I convert my office rage into a useful email? Where you're like, and then it's just like, I'm so sorry, I can't help you at this moment in time. No, it's like translating into emotions into office talk.
I was listening to some podcast recently, not mine, obviously. That would be a nightmare. But for me, not for you. You should all listen to it. But I was listening to some other person's podcast, and there was this point that one of the guys raised about this dystopian future where an entire office full of people are all basically sending AI-generated emails that are getting responded to by other AI-generated emails and just going back and forth. However, at the same time, there was also a really interesting point in there around the amount of drudgery that there is in day-to-day work, right? Like so much of the work, or how much of the work that we do on a day-to-day basis, and if we take this back to product management even, like how much of the day-to-day work that we as PMs do is something that really is fairly automatable versus the stuff that maybe requires a bit more critical thinking. So like, I know a lot of PMs are involved in very heavily delivery-focused roles, or they're doing a lot of message handling or a lot of just communication and coordination. And those are obviously all critical parts of a PM's tool set. But if the PM's spending all of their time doing that and none of their time, for example, doing that speaking to customers or doing that market analysis or competitor analysis or, just re-onboarding themselves to their own platform to see how bad it is these days, or whatever it is that they do that a computer would be much less well placed to do, I'm all for ChatGPT or equivalents to give some of that time back to PMs. I don't think it's going to, as some people have said, maybe be the end of product management or anything. Of course, it'd be the end of those types of tasks for product managers and for everyone else. But in many ways, I'm all here for that, because I want product managers to be doing the proper value add tasks that no one else in the company can do, not sitting there passing messages between people and trying to work out what X, Y, or Z means from some other stakeholder. So yeah, I'm all for that as long as it's used responsibly.
We're nearing the end of our round here. Before I ask the final question, I'm going to plug one thing for everybody, which is about understanding product management a little bit better. We've prepared a video survey, cool new tool about the impact of product management. So we're trying to find out a little bit more, I'm going to say scientifically, how useful it might be. I'll post it in the chat in a second, and we are really looking forward to your responses. And for our final question, maybe you guys can either share a hope or a fear that you have about AI in product management for the rest of the year, your hope can also be that it's not as fearful as you are afraid of. Anyways, like last round before we wrap this up for today.
My fear would be that people overly rely on it and lose their communication, writing, verbal skills, or that situation that Jason just described about AI responding to each other constantly. I do fear that happening. I do. I really do.
Go on, Lisa.
I'm trying to think about how to package this. I have like a hope and a fear together. my fear is that the decisions that we will make in the future are going to be very clouded and biased and impact a lot of people in unintended ways. My hope is that we are able to recognize these things proactively, to put guardrails in place and educate it, not only educate, because I think that's only part of the problem, but also have like very explicit ways of like making it more safe and explicit to use AI tools, no matter what we're using them for in our work life and outside of that as well. And both of those things I think stem from the fact, maybe this is like weird and philosophical, but like everything that is our reality, it stems from what our nervous system is perceiving. An AI tool will never have the same nervous system as a human. And so their reality is very different. And that's the thing that makes me scared of all the things that we're talking about. I think it's wrong to assume that that those two things are ever going to be the same.
I just hope it's used responsibly and it helps people make great products, and that we don't end up with loads of carbon copies and remixes of old stuff. Like, obviously, there's always a chance to iterate and progress based on old things and, like, you know, stand on the shoulders of giants and all of that stuff. But like, I see there's a lot of incredible use cases for some of this stuff that, you know, can be really helpful and game changing, either from a content perspective, which I'm obviously very interested in, like, you know, content marketing or just content stuff to be put out, as well as how it can help us to, you know, come up with novel new ideas. But I just hope that it's used, as I say, in a responsible fashion, and that people's creativity can kind of mix in with the machine's creativity. So we're not all sitting here in like a year's time with like 25 basically identical products on Product Hunt all launching on the same day or something like that, because, you know, I mean, it's just, I don't want that future. I mean, the whole point of product management is that we're making great new stuff that serves our users and our customers' needs as best we can. And I just hope that doesn't get lost in the kind of statistical web of using AI to try and make all the decisions for us.
Jason, you just reminded me of like one quick story I wanted to tell that actually scared the crap out of me. I have a coaching client who works at a large tech company. He had to present something that his team was working on, and he was sick. So he messaged the team. He has a really great relationship with his development team and designers. They said, "Don't worry, we got you. We'll sort it out." They used an AI tool. I think I want to find the link to this. It's like Synthesia or something. It was something like that. Yeah. And they actually had an AI
It
like
is so
person,
creepy.
yeah,
It's so creepy.
present for him, and everyone was like, "This is awesome." And it was such a big company that nobody knew it wasn't an employee. That was like, that's crazy.
The last time I looked at Synthesia, it was just both so real but also so robotic that I was like, I fear for the future. It was cool and terrifying, and I'm like, what is this going to evolve into? It's much like that. Have you heard or used that app that it records you but keeps your eye line centered? So even if you're reading above, like if you have a script in front of you, the AI will make sure that it looks like you're actually looking at the webcam and keep your eyesight on track. And it is super creepy.
Yeah. Great end to this webinar and this roundtable. No, but it's true. I think it's both the hopes and the fears. So thank you very much, guys, for discussing today with us. I think it was very insightful, very valuable. We can probably have this discussion again in like 5 months and see where we're at. Creepy eyes looking at me all the time, or great products that are not carbon copies of all the other products out there. For everybody who's still listening, we put a couple of links in the chat already. It shouldn't be too hard to find our guests. Lisa, Jason, Andrea, great pleasure having you. Thank you so much. See you again.
Thanks for having us. How's it going, everyone?
Thank you so much.
Bye.